This is The Data Slice, hosted by the Data Science Alliance. It's where we sit down to talk all things data, AI, and tech, any way you slice it. I'm Callan Hobman, and joining us today is Dai Li. She is an AI ML design strategist and AI ethicist at ServiceNow, and she's a co-author of a white paper published by the Data Science Alliance. Basically a reflection on life post-ChatGPT and what that looks like, what it all means. So she's joining us today to tell us all about it. But first off, Dai, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Doing so good. I mean, how much is there to complain about being in San Diego?
I know.
And right when you said white paper, I got the biggest blast going down memory lane because I think I've been working with your organization for a little over 2 years now. And this was actually our third white paper together.
You've been so involved with DSA in so many ways, and it's kind of crazy to think because it's kind of a newer organization. And I mean, you've been along for the whole ride.
It's been such a wild ride. What's really cool about it is I think at the time of DSA's, Data Science Alliance's conception even, there were very few organizations, especially locally in San Diego. In fact, I want to say they might have been the only one that were looking at technology, artificial intelligence, data science, this emerging landscape well before generative AI from a responsible and ethical lens.
Mm-hmm. The white paper that you wrote, it's so interesting. I'm so excited to have you here to just, talk through some of those topics. Before we truly dive into all of that, I was thinking for a little background, could you tell us a little more about you? For you, your interest in tech, in AI, all of that whole space, where did it all start for you?
I've come to learn that I have not had a unique experience in my life. And so much of our stories are shared experiences and interests. And I say this because recently I was meeting with different women tech makers, and we were talking about, how did you get into tech? Similar question you're asking me. And I brought up Saturday mornings watching Transformers as a kid with a bowl of cereal and really engaging into this concept of not humanoid robots, but robots that had personality and these artificial worlds. Fast forward many years and many anvils that I've dropped on myself, taking the long and hard road path into my interests. I went into video games. And many people think that this concept of artificial intelligence is relatively new. It's very trendy, and it has to do with AI that is akin to human capabilities and human type level dialogue and cognitive capabilities. But AI as a concept has been around for a long time. So one of my first instances into creating artificial worlds was in video gaming. Following video gaming, I went into the robotics industry. And it was working in robotics. I was conducting user research in both China, Japan, and the United States, really trying to understand the cultural, social, emotional, cognitive impacts of deploying autonomous systems on a unknowing populi, on a non-technical populi, on individuals that potentially work in an industry where they haven't really been disrupted by technology for many decades. And I found that there were a lot of implications that weren't being considered outside of the effective use. Is it easy to use? Is it intuitive? Very traditional user experience paradigms. And so I started this flame, and bunch of red flags started going, making me think, I really care about what happens to people when they are put into a position of using technology where potentially their autonomy is challenged, where they may not have the cognition or the awareness of the type of technology that they're interfacing with. And what does it mean to be a responsible technologist and a responsible technology provider? And that brings me to ServiceNow, where I'd like to think that I am an example of how our industry is changing tremendously so fast. In the last 5 years, I've mainly been working as a UX researcher, as a product designer, and now my role has shifted into human-centered AI strategy. Like, what does that mean? Responsible AI and being an AI ethicist in a giant organization where those type of roles did not really exist for my work path maybe 5-6 years ago.
So you've seen a lot of change in the industry in many ways.
Tremendous change, full disruption, the omission of certain industries and then the building up of said industries into a completely different space.
Earlier, you mentioned the word tech maker. You're a Google Women Tech Makers ambassador. Could you tell us about that experience and how through that you've also kind of seen changes in the industry?
Oh, the Women Tech Makers. This group is so near and dear to my heart, similar to the Data Science Alliance. I used to attend a technology conference that was put on by Google every single year called Google I/O. I attended as a fan, as an enthusiast, as someone who was bright-eyed and so hopeful, and still feel that way, by the way, but so excited about technology and so excited about what people were doing in the industry. And it was this opportunity to meet other people, understand how they got to where they're working at and the things that inspire them. Within Google I/O, I discovered a group called Women Tech Makers. And it's a global organization sponsored by Google, among other organizations, but the primary sponsor is Google. And I joined just as the equivalent of a subscriber, someone who's very excited just to be a part of the group. And then in recent years, I discovered that they were opening up application for tech leaders in the industry that they work in. And you didn't have to be a technologist per se. You could be a media person. You could be someone who works in operations. You could be an artist. But they want a diverse representation and diverse perspectives of people who are tech or tech adjacent to be an ambassador, to host events, create safe spaces for women to share their stories, promote other work that they're doing and the things they care about, like the Data Science Alliance. I promote DSA a lot with the work I do with DSA, with the Google Women Tech Maker ambassadors. But it's truly a coalition of women and allies trying to create opportunities, spaces, and dialogue in technology for women.
I like that, like you said, you use the word tech adjacent. It doesn't have to be someone who really directly works with data or tech or AI, kind of like what Data Science Alliance is all about. You know, everyone should know about data and how it's used, ethical data usage. You don't have to be in the industry to care about this type of thing.
And it's probably more important that people who are not in the industry have a voice and a way to understand what's going on and contribute to the story. And that's what's exciting to me, is that there's been this long-standing thought process and stereotype. I don't want to say it's a stereotype, but it is kind of a stereotype, that in order to break into tech, you have to be an engineer. You have to write code. You have to be deep within the technological space, either in the applied sciences and research. But we're finding that people who offer diverse perspectives that come from industries where this technology is going to be used provide invaluable insights into how to make the technology better.
Well, speaking of it being such this widely accessible thing, you know, the industry and everything, ChatGPT is something I think everyone knows of. I think it'd be hard to not know what that is, or at least have heard of it at this point. And the white paper that we mentioned that you helped write for DSA is called AI Post-ChatGPT, a progress report and future forecast. So what exactly inspired you to get involved with that and help write that publication?
To everybody listening, I promise I was not paid to be here. I was not paid. I'm not sponsored by DSA. I truly am a fan and am so proud of the work that we do. And that was the disclaimer to the sentence I'm about to say, which is one of the things I've always appreciated. I promise I will answer the question, but I really wanted to hype up your organization
Oh, we appreciate it.
in doing this is one of the things I love about working with your organization is each of the working group members, each of the scientists, engineers, business representatives, nonprofits, people from all over that you invite to this collective discourse around responsible AI, you tend to lean in and amplify whatever it is that they want to share. So I, no joke, was ruminating and marinating on the floor following an intense workout. And I was thinking about how it had been 1.5 years roughly since the launch of ChatGPT. And whenever I talk to people about the state of AI and the industry of AI, there's often this before ChatGPT, after ChatGPT timeline where we can honestly put a marker in history on how industries completely changed. So as I was ruminating and marinating on the floor, I grabbed my phone and I started texting Adir and Patricia, who is the director of basically our fearless leader at the Data Science Alliance. And I said, last year we published a paper that was talking about how ChatGPT broke this technological fourth wall. And for my fellow film nerds who get that reference, I salute you. But similar to how in film, when the actors break the fourth wall, Deadpool does this in a brilliantly poetic way. ChatGPT did this with technology. And I was telling Patricia that I would love to write a paper accounting the different ways that technological barrier that was broken has impacted different industries, good and bad, and what we think this means for the future of AI, especially if we break out of this chat prompting box.
So what are some of those key developments that you really wanted to focus on and did focus on when writing that paper when it comes to those changes and developments we've seen in the past, like you said, roughly 1.5 years?
I didn't want it to be a doom and gloom, beware of your life type statement.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be an accurate account of, hey, look at all the marvelous things. But because of that, what are the things that need to change in our industry to protect and safeguard people, their autonomy, and invite more people to the conversation? But mainly just an account, hopefully sparing our own opinions, but also including some of the things that we think need to be thought about in the future and that might happen. And I want to share that in the sense of looking at the landscape of the technology. So I want to share this story of this incredibly creative person that I was so fortunate to interview. And similar to what you were asking me, I was asking her, what are some of the use cases that you find beneficial to you and your company in terms of generative AI or any AI capabilities? And she said, well, we haven't fully integrated it at work yet because of concerns around privacy, regulation, governance, which is a whole separate conversation. But the coolest thing she said to me that inspired me was, she said, I want to be technically relevant. And while I don't have to use AI directly at work yet, you can tell by the media, you can tell by individuals like yourself suddenly asking me, a support person in technology, questions. You can tell by just the pulse of things that the tides are changing and that you have to change with it. So I started using ChatGPT to be my technology professor. And I told ChatGPT, these are the things I know, which was a few things. And these are the things I don't know. And I don't know what my job is going to become. And I don't know what it means to be someone working in this space who isn't an engineer or scientist. And I was like, hey, I'm not an engineer or scientist either. So high five, same. And she said, so she started she called it a brain training program, the equivalent, and used ChatGPT to be a coach to get her up to speed on creative ways to use ChatGPT, creative ways to learn about the technology if she was not an engineer. And all of the stories she told me made me think about people who were not previously privy to this level of capability that now are. And that's something I wanted to amplify in the white paper, not just doom and gloom, your privacy and autonomy, which we'll get to. And I, as an ethicist, trust me, like there are many alarm bells and I care. But I think it's these individual stories that get left out of the statistics of use, adoption statistics, the performance metrics in AI that people talk about. But they're the most impactful and in many ways socially from like a grassroots level changing of culture and the way we behave and use technology in our personal and professional lives.
You use the word technically relevant, and you said the tides are changing, need to change with them. It reminds me of a part of the white paper that talks about the phrase is AI arms race. And it kind of talks about, you and your co-authors wrote about how there's that pressure to keep up, especially for companies or organizations to implement AI and use the latest tech, be with the current trends and innovations and everything. What kind of impact do you think that type of pressure has on people, especially when it comes to that pressure to keep up? But then, like you said, there is the ethical side and needing to genuinely learn the tech and all of that.
So I think many of the conversations that we have, and we bring this up in the white paper too, is that they're with this pressure of at the company level to innovate and be the best, make the best AI, use up all the GPUs and do all AI, all the things. At a social level and individual level, there's also this pressure that you have to stay relevant or you'll get left behind, and that there's aspects of your work that are changing that you don't have control over. And I want to take that a step further, where we operate under the, I want to say it's like a very privileged bias that ChatGPT, Gemini, and even like Anthropic's Claude, a lot of these technologies are widely available. But if we look back to just 4 years ago during the pandemic, when everyone was forced to work remote, go to school remote, we had students that were camped outside of Starbucks and Taco Bell's and everywhere else to gain Wi-Fi access. And when we think about internet access and technology device access across the United States, and the United States is considered one of the, if not the wealthiest country in the world, very advanced, we still struggle to give everybody access to the same type of tools, education tools, technology access, the internet, which now has become a fundamental need to operate in the modern world. But following back and looking at the enterprise and startup and tech landscape, where everybody's racing to innovate and be the best and use up all the GPUs and AI, all the things, something that I'm noticing is that the pace of innovation is outpacing regulation and outpacing and showing the flaws and cracks in a lot of the governance that we have at a political and legal level. But then I think there's this other side of things where it gives me a bit of hope, where there are certain companies, rather than trying to build general intelligence or the best version of AI or human-like robots, they're looking at the practical applications of AI that have not even yet fully been explored before the advent of generative AI. So for example, looking at advancements that certain companies are making with self-driving cars and public transportation and mitigating traffic. There's things that I could go on about in healthcare. There's certain organizations that are trying to correct minority groups and gender bias and a lot of the bias that takes place in medicine due to lack of representation in data. There's organizations like the DSA and others that are operating on a level that are trying to inform others about things that they have to care about. And that's what keeps me quite hopeful, is that in this race for the most advanced AI, there's companies like ServiceNow that are taking a pragmatic approach of how do we use AI to solve like fundamental problems in the workspace before we even start thinking about complete automation or creating the most advanced AI.
A lot of talk about impact, the ethics behind all of this. What are some of the ways that you think we've really seen the conversation around the ethics of AI, and more specifically ChatGPT and what it entails? How have we seen that conversation kind of grow and change as the tech gets more and more advanced?
Something that excites me is how people are changing. I would say 7 years ago, my concern was this apathy towards one's data hygiene, their own privacy, and everything. And now, as emerging technology and features get released and these hype articles come out, I'm starting to see this slow shift towards greater discernment and criticism of how these creations were made. People are starting to ask questions like, was my data included in this? An example was recently Adobe changed their terms of service to include the work that people create using their products as part of their training data for their AI. And I want to believe, based on what I think and I can remember from 10, 15 years ago, there was very rarely discourse around this. And companies, people, all of TikTok was up in arms in protest where they had to change their terms of service. And I truly believe that the court of public opinion is still one that means the most. Something else that is changing, and one of the more positive sides of social media, is now you have industry experts that are creating platforms on different networks to empower others to become more discerning, to be more critical, and learn more about what's happening with their data and how they can be better vigilant in protecting their data. I mean, I follow a couple pages whose entire platform is dedicated to reading every single word in the terms of service for different technology companies and then disseminating that information in an approachable way. You have lawyers that are on TikTok and YouTube that are translating legal policy that is coming out, who, like the EU AI Act, the executive order from the White House, and making it consumable for people of all sorts of levels in technology. So that's one of the biggest changes for me that I'm so excited about and keeps me positive, is that people seem to care more, and that there are more organizations and individuals like yourselves that are focused on responsible technology practices.
It's kind of like there's been a shift in almost like accessibility, and people are helping each other with that shift by, like you said, on social media, there are people who are making it their whole platform, their whole purpose to educate people, make it easier to understand. And I do feel like that's a more recent trend, like we're saying, with things like ChatGPT becoming such a known thing. You kind of can't not know what it is at this point. And I think it's getting people more interested and aware of that type of thing.
And for all of you that are doing that, for every person that has a TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, any social platform, and that's what you're doing, communicating, reading the terms of service, sharing about technology, teaching people about technology, I tip my hat to you. Thank you.
Yes, doing a service
Yes.
to all of us. So the paper also mentions human-centered AI. That's a phrase used. Could you talk a little more about kind of that concept, what that means?
I would love nothing more. This is what my entire job is about, and I love it. I often joke that I get paid to yap and spread propaganda about human-centered and ethical AI, so this is very exciting. The reason why I'm so excited is there's so much information available now that people get inundated with terms. Responsible AI, ethical AI, human-centered AI. So if I may, I would love to, from my perspective, share what I think the differences of those are and why human-centered AI is so special to me. When we talk about ethical AI looks at, as a culture, as a society, what are our moral values and how does AI or the technology that's being released align to that? What are the things that we have to think about? It's a lot of musings, it's a lot of thought, it's a lot of research into the intricacies of morality and emerging technology. Responsible AI, which gets used as an umbrella term for a lot of what I'm speaking about today, takes the ethical considerations, the research, and turns them into things like policy, frameworks, laws, guidelines, principles, a checklist of things that you have to consider and what you should be thinking about. More applicable and more pragmatic approaches to the concept of what is good and bad use of AI and what are the gray areas. Human-centered AI, my favorite, especially for all the product designers and UX people there. This is our bread and butter, human-centered design. But human-centered AI takes that a step further beyond just what is morally aligned to our societal values and starts looking at the things that humans value and the things that give them joy, the things that they find interesting, the things about being human, existing in a world that has to work with technology. What are their aspirations? What are the things that make that task or that job or that experience worth doing? And it gets deeper into all the happiness indicators that we have as humans.
You mentioned UX. I know you have lots of experience with that. How does UX and Gen AI, ChatGPT, all of that, how do they kind of intersect, especially when it comes to things like you just said, like helping people better understand the technology?
User experience design and research, human experience design and research plays this critical role in how people experience technology. And that is even more imperative now with generative AI. Something I find is that adoption still tends to be the greatest measurement in how successful a product is. And with generative AI, this concept of adoption and trustworthy AI tends to get conflated. Whenever I speak to designers, many of us remember this book called Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. And it's basically like the UXer's guide how-to that we all basically inherited this book one way or another, whether it was through school, a friend, a design mentor, a leader. It's like, really look at this, Don't Make Me Think. And it was our design Bible. And with generative AI, something that is incredibly interesting and illuminating is that we now have to challenge 30 years of design convention, of this don't make me think, make it easy as possible, make everything invisible and just make things happen. With generative AI, because systems are so probabilistic and there's greater risk for unintended outcomes, there's a need for bias mitigation. There's a need to be more discerning around the content being provided to you, whether it is factual or not. We almost need to design experiences and add intentional friction to areas of technology to make people think, to encourage discernment, to encourage critical review of these AI systems. And I think that is the biggest shift that is taking place in terms of how designers will have to approach AI and the way that they look at designing experiences.
Something that the paper talks about is a technological gap and kind of that concept. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit and maybe ways that, like you were saying, UX can help people understand? Is there a way that UX can tie into the technological gap when it comes to making it just more accessible and understandable for people?
Thinking about this gives me so much joy because I think of designers as designers and UX researchers, that our entire industry of human experience designers as this last gap that are the gatekeepers in protecting experiences and promoting human joy in experiences without getting too cheesy. But what I wanted to say is that human experience designers and the entire industry of UX is now shifting from this thought of just creating experiences that are efficient and that people can use to now crafting workflows and architecting and embedding AI in a way where we're educating the people who are using the technology, creating layers of safeguards, creating and embedding areas to elevate the role of the end user, increasing and amplifying their capabilities, looking at what people are good at and amplifying that, looking at how we can level up someone's understanding of the technology that they're using, providing things like model output transparency. How did the AI arrive to certain outcomes? I think a critical part in what's missing that UX can really elevate is this human collaboration aspect and the human feedback loop, where technology and person can benefit from each other. So the person provides input to provide nuance and context where the model can learn from it, but at the same time, the technology that's being used can amplify what the person is good at.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a cycle, like you
Yeah.
said, a give and take of improving all around, really.
Like true human-machine collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And I truly think what's exciting about this is that it's a greater design challenge than just, don't make me think.
I think that outlook could be probably comforting for people who might have fears. There is that sense of fear and concern as we see this tech evolve and become more and more normal, in today's world. I think there are concerns, many which are valid. But what you just described is such a great outlook, I think, of it's a collaboration. People joke about the tech taking over the world, but it's not a power game or anything. It's more just, it's that collaboration, like you said.
And there will be industries that change, and there will be legacy industries that transform, but my call to other technologists and to other practitioners is to be really mindful and thoughtful about these experiences that we're creating. And I joke, oftentimes people will joke with me and say, Di, we operate in a capitalistic society, and that there's no, what did they say? There is no profit in altruism. And I always challenge that by saying, yes, but the stories of Enron and others like it would show otherwise. So I still hold firm that the court of public opinion is one that's still very most important, if not the most important.
You mentioned earlier the EU AI Act, regulations around it. So kind of speaking of, the role people play in this, there is lots of talk about regulating AI and just the tech in general. Are there any specific steps or conversations that you are happy to see going on right now or want to see when it comes to kind of that regulation and creating policies?
GDPR, the EU AI Act, they stand as somewhat the beacon in terms of being the most stringent policies when it comes to governing data privacy and artificial intelligence in general. I do think what's exciting is that our government is starting to follow suit. And while they are not creating enforceable policy yet, there are discussions with the domestic economy and the enterprise company and also the tech sector of trying to recruit and get involvement from practitioners and individuals like myself and others that I've worked with on different types of guidance policies that are coming out at a operational level in the industry. For example, Hugging Face's Big Code project, which ServiceNow collaborated with them with. It's a large language model for code generation. They were one of the first at that scale to offer an opt-out pathway for your data. So it was trained on the entirety of GitHub, but they offered ways for individuals or organizations or people to say, hey, I'd like to opt out, which is huge. Previously, it'd be embedded in some tiny print on the terms of service, and just by using the service, your data is then subject to whatever they want to do with it. Another thing that's exciting is this concept around transparency and model cards. And you can think of model cards or system cards are like the nutrition labels, but for your technology that you're using. And it's documenting out things like the data that was used, intended use, how it was trained, what are some considerations, what are some ethical considerations. So there are standards and practices that are changing.
How does it feel, especially as someone who is very much in the industry, has been watching all of this change and grow over the years? How does it feel to see those changes and steps being taken, like the model cards you just said? How does it feel to see these steps actively being taken and tangible, happening now to protect people and make it more transparent and clear and ethical and all that?
The professional answer will be overjoyed beyond measure. And then the real answer is 5 years ago, I felt like I was holding a torch, banging on doors, finding a few other bandits that were willing to join me to also spread propaganda about ethical AI and responsible AI. And now it feels like all of a sudden there's thousands of people holding that torch, illuminating this night and marching together. There's entire communities around this very concept of building responsible technology and understanding the human impact of it. There's dedicated research practices around what explainable AI is, what transparent AI is, mitigating bias, like these nuanced specificities under the umbrella of responsible AI now have people carrying individual torches in that domain. And it makes me so happy. It makes my heart so warm. It makes me feel hopeful. But at the same time, you know how there's that saying, you don't know what you don't know? And now it seems like there's even more work to be done than 5-6 years ago. But it's very, very cool that more people are getting into it. And it's even more cool that this domain of ethical and responsible AI is cool. I mean, so even in terms of sharing what your job title is, before when I told people, yeah, I work in gaming, I would get, oh, that's really cool. And then I'm a UX designer, mobile apps, like robotics, we're like, oh, so cool. And initially when I'm like, ethical AI, people go, oh, what? Huh? But in the last few years, it's also been met with like, oh, that's really cool. That's really cool. And I'm like,
People know what that means a little bit more
Yeah.
than probably a couple years
Precisely.
ago. For people who might want to get involved or learn more, when it comes to this conversation on ethical AI and just knowing more about it, do you have any recommendations?
Yes. One of the questions that I get the most is, how do I get into AI? How do I break into the industry? How do I start using AI? So I have a list of my favorite courses. One is like AI for everyone that starts from you don't have to know how to code, foundations, and then it gets more complex. And I also have a list of favorite creators that look at things from the legal lens, the terms of service lens, and just the industry of AI in general. And then, of course, some of my favorite papers that are still relevant today on responsible AI. So I can share that list with Callan, who can then share it with all of you.
Yeah, we'll definitely link that in the show notes for everyone. Make it quick and easy to find. Well, so much has changed, and the paper, like we said, is all about the past 1.5 years, which in the scheme of life is not much time. So we might need to have you back on, in 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 years. Every year it's going to be so different.
It'll be so different. I'm excited to see how the Data Science Alliance grows, what we do together. I'm excited to see what the next paper would look like. I'm most excited to see if our future forecasts come to fruition.
True. Yeah, because it is exactly that. It is a forecast. We, as you said, we only know what we know, don't know what we don't know. Some of this we'll have to just stay tuned, I think.
Yeah.
If you want to read the paper written by Di and several other amazing co-authors, it is on our website, datasciencealliance.org. But Di, we, just thank you so much for coming on and talking about the paper, because I think it's one thing to read it, but another thing to hear from one of the authors and all of your experiences that tie into what you wrote. So really appreciate you coming on and talking about all of this. But like we said, I think we'll of course be in touch. We'll need to have you back on to keep us updated on what the white paper forecasted and what we turn out seeing.
Thank you so much for having me, and high five. I love working with y'all, and keep fighting the good fight.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow the Data Science Alliance on all of your favorite social media platforms. And don't forget, DSA is a 501c3 nonprofit that you can support. You can do a one-time donation, a monthly or annual donation through our memberships, volunteer your time on our projects, or attend our events. We have lots of events going on here at our location in San Diego, California. Lots of ways to get involved, so go to our website, datasciencealliance.org, to learn all about it. But otherwise, we'll see you here next time on The Data Slice.